Okay. So we started the recording for this office hours a little late. So this is the October 22nd office hours. Um, we have Samira, who's a community member who's just joined, and we were helping her with the cluster migration scenario and uh, walking through how cluster migration works. So just for the recording purposes, I will start over or say whatever I said again. Um, so the way cluster migration works today is you have an object store where all your backups from your clusters are written to, and to migrate the workloads from one cluster to another, the way you would do that using Velero is you would run Velero and grant Velero access, Velero on the new cluster and grant it access to the object store where backups were written to. And uh, Velero would then read those backups and restore them into this new cluster. So that is how cluster migration would work. And we also have a page on our website for cluster migration. Uh, I know that this page can use some tender love and care. So please refer to this if there are things that aren't clear. Please open doc issues, or even better yet, open pull requests to help us make our documentation better. Uh, Samira, have you looked at this page
Yeah,
before?
I've tried a couple of POCs on this part. So tried migrating from AWS, sorry, not Azure to Google Cloud. So
Okay.
I tried this scenario. Like during this process, I've observed. Uh, I'm not sure if these things have been fixed recently, but there are a couple of minor things that I've observed during this. I mean, the whole process was very good. Like I liked the entire thing. So what happened is like I was just installing in a Valero in an Azure cloud, and then we have this key to be account key. We have to supply the key, right? Though the
Yeah.
key is in the deployment YAML of Velero controller. So, I mean, that isn't very visible for me on the over the documentation. So,
Okay.
uh, probably, I mean, I found that in one of the GitHub issues, and I've contacted the Slack team of Velero, and probably these kind of minor issues, if we can i- include in the documentation, it would be helpful.
So this is around documentation of giving Valero in your Azure cluster
Yeah,
Google credentials.
yeah.
Okay. Cool. I think that's a valid point, and this document does not address that. Uh, we can definitely uh, help take care of that. Uh, if you were so in the end, were you able to?
Yeah, I was able to migrate the
Okay.
data. Yeah, I was able
So
to. I've
uh,
taken some help from the Slack team, pinged in
okay.
Slack, and someone else helped me over the Slack.
Cool. So if you wouldn't mind, would you be able to like put those instructions or the steps that you followed into a document and open a pull request for us?
Yeah, sure, definitely, I would do that.
Yeah, that would be super helpful. Thank you. And were you also just out of curiosity, were you also migrating persistent volumes in your migration scenario?
Yeah, I did. I did persistent volume
Okay,
migration also.
so you were using restic, so I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Then restic I've used it. I mean, restic also I've tried, but I've mostly used the storage persistent volume using the cloud provider
Okay,
storage class. I've
okay,
tried both the scenarios.
okay. But for migration, you would have used restic.
Yeah, yeah. For migration, I've used
Yeah,
it.
cool. Thank you for offering to help with the migration documentation stuff. That's going to be super useful and helpful for everybody in the community.
Also, on the controller side, we have the client community communicating to the controller over the REST API, right?
So the client, when you say client, are you referring to the
The
Velero
Velero
client?
CLI. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Velero CLI is contacting the Velero controller through a REST API. So since
Mm,
all the communication is happening, I mean, even the I've read the architecture and some. I'm not sure if I'm missing out something, but I've read some internals of Velero. But in the internals of Velero, I've observed that Velero even contacts the API server and not the etcd directly
yep.
for any kind of information. So, is it possible that to get the Velero controller out? I mean, not all because the CRDs has to work. I mean, probably uh, the kind of things where we just contact API server for minor things. For the creation or the CRUD part, we can keep the controller there and can we make it a bit lighter?
So uh, the Velero client, there, yeah, like you're right. There are two components. There's the Velero server, which runs all the controllers, and then the Velero client. But the client and the server don't communicate with each other directly. So the way the communication happens is via creation of custom resource definitions or custom resources. So the Velero client is very light. It's just going to perform some validation on the client side and create, say, let's say, for example, backup objects, um, which the controller running in the cluster will recognize, and as part of its reconciliation loop, will run the backup process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, so there is no REST API per se, but um, the Velero client just creates
Also
objects in
creating.
the cluster.
Yeah, CRD.
And then as far as Velero communicates with the API server and not etcd, yes. So all the backup, as part of backup and restore, all the operations that Velero runs is going to go through the API server directly, uh, or to the API server and not to etcd directly. That is why this Velero backup is like purpose built for Kubernetes using Kubernetes.
So we have this Velero status. So where once the backup has been started, we have the provision to describe the backup and see the logs of the backup. Do we have any kind of watch mechanism where we can see where the backup is, or
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. When we
oh,
have
sorry.
backup.
So when we have backup, we have the provision to describe the backup and see the state of where the backup is and see the logs of the backup.
Mhm.
Do we have any provision of seeing the watch status, like where the backup is? What are what are the things that have been backed up? I mean,
So yeah, in as part of Velero 1.4, we added this new feature of backup progress. Um, which is constantly like updated as the backup is running. I'm trying to pull up documentation like in our API types. Uh, we have uh, okay, I don't think we have this website this documentation updated, but I can bring it up onto a terminal. So if you look at our API types, we have this struct, which is in the backup object itself. Um, if you see in the backup status, this item, this object or this field gets constantly updated as the backup is running and as the backup process is running. So we have a running count of the items that have been backed up and the total backed up
Okay.
items. Uh, but we don't maintain like a list of each item being backed up, uh, mainly because of it's hard to maintain this, keep this updated in a timely fashion. However, when you like describe the backup with details, once the backup is completed, we have the resource list in the backup, which will have everything that's in the backup. So this is what I'm talking about. So this is the resource list, which will have all the items that were in the backup. So we have events, we have this namespace that was backed up, we have these PVCs or these PBs, these PVCs and pods and etc. So that is what it would have. And this is coming from the progress that I showed you. Like we had 24 items to be backed up and we backed up all 24 of them. And this also includes differentiates between like Velero native snapshots and restic snapshots, restic backups. Did that answer your question?
Yes, 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 Ashish. Thank you.
Oh,
But I
okay,
really like the cluster migration part of Velero. I mean, it's really awesome.
thank you.
I think from my side, these are the questions.
Okay, cool. And as part of our regular uh, agenda, we wanted to do like a demo of how backup and recovery in Velero works. And once we are through with that, we will also go over how we can start contributing to Velero. I think one of our members in the community added this question. I am going I'm going to say let's wait till that person shows up in their interest so
Yeah,
that they
sure, sure.
can ask their question straight
Okay.
up. Um, I think Bridget had a demo that was prepared. Bridget, do you want to run through that?
Yeah, I can do that. Absolutely. Um, so just in terms of like what it was that I had prepared, I just want to make sure that like for this, is this just I don't know. So Samira, it sounds like you've already got like a lot of experience with Valero. So I don't know, maybe like what I'm about to do might be too basic. So I don't know whether we want to carry on and do this just for the recording, so that other folks can watch it later, or whether. Sorry, I don't know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think for the purpose of the recording and for folks who will watch it afterwards, we can do like a basic demo. The demo can start off with as basic as possible, and we can build on it if we want,
Absolutely.
or if time permits.
Sure. Well, let me, I'm just going to mute.
So
I'm going to get some things set up here. I've kind of gotten there, but I just need to um,
sure, let
get
me
a
know when you
terminal
would
that's
like to
a
start.
reasonable size to share.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not ask if my terminal was visible when I was showing all this. So this is the resource list I was talking about. This is coming from the progress field from here. Make this also a little bigger. Um, so this is coming from the progress field, which is part of the backup status. And then these are all the resources that are in the backup, which is listed in uh, the backups describe output. So this is the command that I ran. V is my alias for the Velero client that is on my laptop that I built from main. So uh, that's uh, that's the command that I'm running. Nothing super special.
Okay, I think I'm good to go here.
Okay,
So I
I'm going to
can,
stop sharing and let you share
okay, great,
your
thank you.
screen. Go for it.
Okay, okay, so I'm sharing now. Can, does this seem, is the size and everything here okay?
Yep, it's fine for me. And
Great. So I'm just gonna move this over to one side. So I've set up a cluster locally, which has Velero already installed. So to install Velero, I've used the Velero install command. So like Ashish, I'm also using V as my alias just for a locally built version of Velero that I have. So I've installed it. I'm using AWS as the provider in the AWS plugin. But I'm not actually using AWS directly. I'm actually using Minio, which is an S3 compatible storage, which I'm just running locally in a Docker container. And so whenever I've installed Velero, I've set it up so that I've passed it the credentials in order to talk to this bucket, or sorry, in order to talk to the storage. I've got a bucket here for where I'm going to store the backups. And then I've also passed the configuration details to Velero as well so that it knows how to communicate with this particular storage. So I've got the S3 URL, which is just a local IP, and then I'm also going to enable restic for the backups that I'm going to create. So whenever, so after I've done this installation, we can view Velero running in the cluster. So I'm just going to do get pods. By default, Velero will create all the resources that it needs inside the Velero namespace. This is configurable, but for my purposes, I'm happy to just let it install in the Velero namespace. So if I do get pods, we can see that we have a restic pod running, and then we also have the main Velero pod. And so the Velero runs as a deployment. So this is just the pod that has been created from that deployment. And then restic runs as a daemon set on so that there's a pod running on every node in your cluster. I'm just running a kind cluster locally, so I only have one node, so I only have one instance of restic. Okay, so right before this, I've been so I've been working with Ashish, and he has been pointing out some really useful tools within the CSI space for doing for being able to use, so the one thing that I have installed on my cluster is the CSI host path drivers. That just means I'm able to create persistent volumes and claims using the host path driver locally. It's not really relevant, but with that project, one thing that is there is that they just have some small example applications which you can deploy into your cluster. So that's what I have here. So I've got this namespace called CSI app. So if we take a look at what is running in that namespace, you see that we've got this one pod. I'm just going to describe that to show what is in there. So this is just a pod that is it's not really, it's running a very basic command, but within it, it also has some data mounted local, some data from a volume that is mounted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to perform a backup using Velero of this namespace. And so hopefully with this, the Velero backup is going to back up all the resources in this namespace, and that includes a persistent volume that I have, a persistent volume claim in CSI app namespace. So let's perform a Velero backup. So to create a backup, you simply just use the Velero backup create command, and then we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to call it my, I'm just going to call it app backup. And whenever you're creating a backup, you can, there are lots of different configuration options that you can pass to Velero. So you can back up specific namespaces, specific, you can choose to include or exclude namespaces. And then you can also instruct Velero to include cluster resources or not in the backup. So if you check out the Velero documentation, there is backup reference. So you can, so I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger. So you can exclude different specific items and also specify some orderings. I know that there is, I think there are some other configuration options for backups. But I think for now, for this particular example, we're just going to create a backup. I'm going to say include namespaces. I'm going to say just back up my CSI app namespace.
Bridget, I pasted a link in the Zoom chat, which takes you to the resource filtering docs. I think that's what you were looking for.
Excellent. Yes. I'm going to open that up just so that people can see it. Folks can see it in the recording after this is over. Yeah. Sorry.
I sent it to you in Zoom chat. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm trying to find Zoom. I don't have the Zoom chat open. Where is it? There we go. Sorry. It was a very big, bright screen. Okay, so yes, this is the resource filtering. So resource filtering, so you can say include particular namespaces, include resources, include cluster resources, and then you can also apply selectors. That was the other thing I was trying to remember, but couldn't. So if you only want to back up particular items that have a particular label applied to them, that is an option that you can use as well. Okay. So whenever I ran the Velero backup command, what it did behind the scenes was that it created a backup custom resource on the cluster. So if we take a look at get backups, so we have the app backup that was created. So whenever that custom resource was created, the backup controller that's running from Velero is running. It's running on the cluster. Once that resource is created, the controller processes that and then starts the backup operation. So we can view the logs for that backup. logs, right, yeah. So here we can see we've got a whole host of logs of various things that Velero has given us information about, but we can see that it's decided which items it's going to back up, and then we could get a log line, say that the item's been processed and that's been backed up. But at the end, we backed up 6 items. I have an estimated total of 6. So backed up all the items that Velero thought we needed to back up. And so if we take a look at our object storage, so this is where the backup has gone to. It's gone to my Minio object storage. So take a look in backups. We have the app backup, and here are all the different resources representing a backup that Velero has captured. So we've got the JSON, which describes the backup details and results, and then we've got the logs, and then also various other backups as well. So now we can delete the namespace, and then we've got this backup. We can delete the namespace and delete all the resources that were in that namespace, and then we can use Velero restore in order to restore them back into our cluster. So I'm just going to delete namespace, CSI app. It's being very slow. I don't know why that didn't terminate. Okay, so the namespace is gone. So we no longer have the pod that was running or the data and the persistent volume that went along with that. So now we can do Velero restore, create, and so what I'm going to tell Velero to do is perform a restore from the backup that I created. So just for a reminder, backups. So v restore create from backup. And again, this time a restore object has been created and the restore controller from Velero is running and is processing that now. So if we do Velero restore describe, these are the details. So all the resources that were in the backup will be restored. So one thing that you can do as well as filtering resources on backup, you can also choose to filter the resources at restore time as well. So if you have a backup that you've taken that includes all your cluster resources, but maybe you only want to restore a subset of those, you can apply some filters as well at that stage. But for this case, I'm just backing up everything that was in, I'm just restoring everything that was in that backup. So now if I do, if I check the namespaces that we have, we can see that the CSI app has namespace has been created again. And yes, then we have our CSI app up and running. Does that make sense so far? Is that all okay? Ashish, if I missed anything very obvious?
No, all looks good.
Okay, great. Okay, so next stage, what we're going to do is we're going to I'm going to perform another backup and restore, but this time I'm going to make use of restic. So I'm going to use restic to back up the contents of some volumes that I have, which are attached to this pod. So if I do, yeah. So I'm going to just exec into the CSI app container that within this pod. So I'm just going to do another describe of this particular pod to show it. Oh, nope. So this pod has a volume attached to it, and this volume is mounted into this container at /data. So within this container, I am going to write some data or a file to that directory and ultimately to that volume. So if I go to /data, there's nothing in this directory, but if I do office. Excellent. So we have a file on the in that directory and in that volume. So I'm going to do now is perform another backup. And so this time I'm going to create the backup. So whenever you want, so in order to perform a backup using restic, there are two ways to signal to Velero that you want restic to be used. So the first way is that you can annotate the pod. You can provide an annotation on the pod, which Velero will see and knows to look for. And if that annotation is present, it will use restic to back up the volumes. However, with 1.5, there's a new flag that has been introduced, which is called default volumes to restic. And what this flag does is that if there are any volumes which are present, which, she's correct me if I'm wrong, if there are volumes which are present which don't have snapshotting capabilities associated with them, is that correct? So if you can't perform a snapshot, then we'll default to using restic to perform those backups. So I saw on the little screen that you nodded, so I'm going to assume that was okay.
If your volume provider doesn't have snapshotting capabilities, then you would use that. Or like in Samira's case, where they were migrating across providers, that is also a scenario where you might use restic.
Yeah.
Which is like cloud agnostic or provider agnostic file system level backup of your volumes.
Thanks, Ashish. So this time we're going to create a backup, but we're going to use that default volumes to restic. Okay, so that backup has been created. We can get backups, and now we can see that this backup is in progress. Let's see if we can view the logs for it. Oh, I didn't filter on the namespace, but that's okay. So this time I've just told Velero to back up everything in the cluster essentially. So that's why there are so many more items this time. But again, I'm going to, so first of all, actually, before we do the restore, in our object storage, we have a restic directory, And within that, this is where all the restic snapshot information, or sorry, all the restic backup information goes to. So so all of the layout of this is all very restic specific. So we don't need to go too much into that, but just know that that data has been backed up and that is where it is. So let's go back here. So I'm going to delete the namespace again.
So while we wait for like the namespace to be deleted, I added another link to our notes which has information about like opt-in and opt-out behavior for restic. Um, what by default how you can enable restic for to back up pod volumes without having to annotate each pod, and then you can also do the opposite, saying you want to you can also say enable restic by default except for these volumes, which you can supply using an annotation. So that is also possible. And while restic is enabled by default, there are three kinds of volumes that we don't um, uh, back up. Uh, they are like the backups or the volumes mounting like the default service account tokens, or like the host path volumes, or like secrets, volumes mounting secrets, because secrets are a different uh, Kubernetes object themselves, secrets and config maps. They are going to be backed up by regular Velero backup. We don't want to back up volumes that are mounting these secrets, because there may be scenarios where these secrets may change from one cluster to another if you are doing cluster migration.
Awesome. Thanks for the extra info, Ashish. Okay, so the namespace and the associated resources have now been deleted, but now I'm going to perform the restore. So I'm going to do restore create from okay, so I've just created another backup from the sorry, I've just created another restore from the backup that we've just created. So yeah, so our So when we perform a restic restore, how we do that is Velero, when restoring the pod object, will run an init container, which runs restic to extract the data from your restic store and write the data from restic to the volume where it was taken from. So in this case, this is why we now have an init container running. This is the restic container. So if I describe this pod, we can see that we have this restic container that's running. So it's just running a restore helper from the Velero team, which runs restic and restores the volume, restores the data to the associated volume. Okay. Yep, that pod is now running. So I'm just going to exec into that again. Hopefully, if I've done this correctly, the file that we'd written is there. So let's there we go. So that was the pod's been restored, but then also the data that we wrote to the volume that was attached to that pod has also been persisted using restic and has been restored. Okay, so that was my demo of a basic backup and restore using Velero. Ashish, is there anything else that you think that we should add at this stage, or anything else that's interesting for any folks that are watching this to know about?
Uh, no, this was like a awesome demo. It was more detailed than I uh, had in mind of preparing for. So this was good.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so I know that we also had in the office hours doc to potentially chat about contributing to Velero. Do you think we should do that now, or do you want to hold off and do that um, during another session? What do you think?
I am okay doing this. I'm going to let no sorry, Jonas uh, have an input as well. Um,
Mhm.
maybe this can be like an ongoing section in each of our office hours.
I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now.
Yeah, feel free to add in demos and discussions and everything to the office hours. Absolutely.
Okay, I think we can close off today's office hours with the information about how to get started contributing to Velero and how to reach us for help getting started contributing to Velero. Uh, so as let me start sharing my screen again. So yeah, on looking going back to our documents website, we have uh, these links that will help you start contributing, uh, which has like uh, things that you might want to familiarize yourself to get around or navigating the Velero code base and how to navigate issues that have been opened. We also have instructions on how to like build Velero locally. We will also cover this in another office hours episode sometime, either next one or the following one, how to build Velero locally and how to run that in like locally without using any cloud provider, like the setup that Bridget was using today. We will do a step-by-step walkthrough of how to get that going for yourself on your laptop. And then we also have some coding standards basically around opening PRs, like requiring you to sign off commits and adding a change log just so that you can get credits for the features that you contribute or any changes that you contribute and stuff. So this is a good resource to make use of. The other thing that we would really welcome, I know Samira, you said you are going to help us with some documentation. So we have like a style guide for documentation, which seems pretty long, but it's a pretty quick read. Uh, so I would strongly suggest familiarizing yourself with some of these. May not be all, um, just to help the review process of the PRs go through faster. Uh, and mm, yeah, anything else that we want to add? The other thing that I wanted to mention is like how to reach us. You can contact us either via Slack. Uh, our Slack channel is Velero in the upstream Kubernetes Slack, and this is our team. These are all the engineers, and Tim is the uh, manager on the team for who kind of facilitates stuff for us. So this is a good place to stop, I suppose. You can so a couple more things on how to reach us. You can reach us via Slack on the Velero channel in upstream Kubernetes Slack. We also have a Google Groups that you can join. And then you can also reach us via Twitter, and our handle is here. This is our Twitter account. And you can follow us for updates with respect to Velero. You can follow us for announcements that we make. So we uh, also post job openings that we have on our team, like this one. So uh, feel free to follow us or reach us in if you need help. With that, I think we can close off today's office hours, unless anybody else has other questions that you may have thought of while you were watching the demo.
Nothing from my side. I think
Okay,
I'm good.
cool. And on that note, I think we can stop the recording and
Will do.